Webster defines crunch time as a critical moment or period, like the end of a game, when decisive action is needed. Every sports fan knows this time in the game. Your palms sweat just a little more, your heart races just a little bit faster, and you live and die with every play until the final seconds tick off the clock and you're either celebrating a victory or disappointed by the defeat. The team at Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network understands just how critical these moments are. For us, it begins as soon as the next set of games are on the board. We evaluate the opening lines and any breaking news throughout the week. We cover each game inside and out, whether it's from inside the locker room to a huddle down on the field, the court, or the ice. We take you inside the meeting room with scouts, coaches, and executives. We have our fingers on the pulse of all the sports that we cover: the National Hockey League, NBA, college basketball, college football, and the National Football League. We are the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, and we're here to help you find your sports advantage. After all the data has been crunched, we then turn it over to Kenneth for the best analysis around. His unique perspective in both understanding the data and how it applies to the game and how you win is the Crunch Time Sports Advantage. Are you ready? The Crunch Time Jet is fueled and ready for takeoff, and the Crunch Time Express is about to leave the station. Your VIP pass has been approved, so all aboard.
Welcome to the 2024 College Football Team Autopsy Report. An autopsy report is a document that summarizes the findings of an autopsy, an examination of a body after death. It includes details of the examination, tests, and observations performed, as well as the cause and manner of death. Just like a real autopsy report, the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network College Football Autopsy Report examines a team's body of work after the season has concluded. This report includes a review of the team's season win total and whether they met expectations, key offensive, defensive, and special teams metrics that shaped the season, a deep dive into coaching decisions, including situational play and fourth down aggressiveness, a final season grade, evaluating execution, performance in key moments, and consistency, the final verdict, analyzing what went right, what went wrong, and what must be fixed for 2025. With the 2024 season in the rearview mirror, it's time to examine the patient. To present the findings, we have called in our Chief Medical Examiner and Senior Analyst, Kenneth.
And welcome back for our final team in the Atlantic Coast Conference. We're heading back down the Tobacco Road, and we're going to take a look at the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. Folks, a lot to cover with this team, a lot of ground to cover with this coach, Dave Clawson. So let's not waste any time. I got you for about the next 27 minutes as I look at the clock. Okay, Dave Clawson, 16 years as a head coach, sub 500 record. Now, his time in Bowling Green, absolutely 500 head coach. Took a little bit to really kind of get that program going, but final two seasons won a total of 18 games. Parlayed that into the head coach there in Winston-Salem, there with the Demon Deacons. And now looking at his resume, 11 years in, 67 wins, 69 losses. Folks, Coach Clawson has more seasons with 5 or fewer wins than he does have successful seasons. That's a problem for me. And that's why this coach should absolutely be on the hot seat. When you think about it, the high water mark for Wake Forest came in 2021 when they finished a remarkable 11-3, went on to win the Gator Bowl that year. Since then, this team has won a total of 12 games in 3 years. 8-5 in 2022, 4-8 in 2023, and the same record in 2024. We're at a watershed moment here for this program. Kind of need to start to get busy living or get busy dying, as a friend of mine likes to say in this business. So let's take a look right where we always like to start. And if you're watching this on YouTube or streaming this on our Twitter feed at Crunchtime VIP, want to say thank you. If you're listening on your podcast platform, thank you for joining us as well. I got you covered with the data here. Now, let's start with the season betting total. This team came into the season in June with a season win total of 4.5. Failed to get there on that mark. When we look at our composite win total, basically there are 3 in-season statistical data points that we look at to come up with what a team season win total should be at the end of the year. We actually had this team at a 4.8. So there's a game that I'm going to look at this schedule, and I think I'm going to be able to highlight really quickly that game that they probably should have won, but either lack of execution or failure to really kind of take advantage of the situation cost them that particular game. Now, let's talk about the strength of schedule and strength of record. Your strength of schedule, you can only really kind of dictate the portion of your non-conference schedule. So about 4 games. Did you schedule a tough non-conference schedule, or did you load up on cupcakes like some programs like to do? When I look at Wake Forest, 0.411, 55th out of 134 teams last year. So a solid schedule. Now, when we look at your strength of record, now this you absolutely have no control over. This is basically how well did your opponents do at the end of the year? Did they have a lot of wins or a lot of losses? And when I look at a number like 0.614, this was the 17th toughest strength of record in college football last year. So when we start to dive into their opponent's records here in just a moment, you're going to see a lot of teams with some really good records here. And let's go ahead and jump into that right now. They opened the season with an FCS opponent in North Carolina A&T. So we throw that out. Virginia was 5-7. Ole Miss was 9-3. The Raging Cajuns of Louisiana was 10-2. NC State 6-3. Clemson 9-3. Make sure I went back and covered that right. So Ole Miss was 9-3. Louisiana Raging Cajuns 10-2. NC State 6-6. Clemson 9-3. UConn was 8-4. Stanford was 3-9. Remember, that's a conference game now. Cal, also a conference game, 6-6. North Carolina 6-6. Miami 10-2, and Duke was 9-3. So, like I said, quite a few teams there with at least 8 wins or better during the regular season. Now, how good were the defenses that Wake Forest went up against last year? We used that baseline for this season to evaluate at 68. Why? It's because we have 68 Power 4 teams when we look at the 4 major conferences and Notre Dame. So that's where we come up with that baseline number. Virginia was 65th. Ole Miss had the 4th best scoring defense for us last year. Then you go down to Clemson was 35th. Cal was 46th. Miami was 47th, and Duke 45th. When you look at their schedule, you're talking about 60.5 average power ranking per opponent. Folks, that's a team that probably should be about 6-6, maybe 7-5, just from a defensive standpoint. You're looking at one opponent inside of the top 30 last year. So week in and week out, this team wasn't facing elite caliber defenses like we've seen with some other teams. When we look at it outside of the top 70, you're talking about the Raging Cajuns. You're talking about NC State was 95th. Stanford was 90th, and North Carolina was 88th. So 4 of their opponents were outside of that top 70. This is where you got to take advantage of those opportunities. And I said I would highlight the game that they lost that they should have absolutely won. Look no further than the game against the Raging Cajuns when they lost that game 38-41. You win that game, you at least get over your projected win total there of 5. Now, let's take a deeper dive into this offense last year and see if the offense was the problem or the defense. Now, average team last year scored about 28 points per game. Wake Forest was at 25.7. When we adjust for opponent, ticks down just a little bit at 24.8. When we look at the passing yards, the average team last year was about 227 yards per game passing. Wake Forest was at 240 yards per game. When we adjust for opponent, goes down to 222 yards per game. As far as the rushing offense, average team last year about 160 yards per game. Wake Forest was at 131. When we adjust for opponent, goes up to about 149 yards per game. Total offense for Division I team last year, 387 yards per game. Wake Forest, whether we're looking at their accounting numbers or are adjusted, 371 yards per game. So offense, passing, not as good as what the accounting stats will show. The run game was just a little bit better, but it absolutely balanced out with their total offense. Now, this team gave up way too many sacks last year in that slow mesh kind of option style offense that they run. 40 sacks allowed, and you're talking about not with a mobile quarterback. So to give up 40 sacks during the regular season, you had major leakage there at the offensive line standpoint. Also combine that with the quarterback taking some unnecessary sacks, not throwing the ball away. Combine that with 21 turnovers. This offense definitely not a part of the solution there, more so part of the problem there. Now, let's take a look at the three. I'm sorry. Yeah, I did skip that. Thank you. Okay, so let's get to scoring drives. Average team last year scored on about 40% of their drives, either a touchdown or field goal. Wake Forest, 38%, so not a big differential there. As far as drives ending with a touchdown, average team last year about 29%. Wake Forest was at 26.5%. On third downs, this team was actually a little bit better. NCAA average was 39%. Wake Forest was almost at about 41% on third downs. Let's take a look at those 3 E's as I was kind of in a rush to get to. How effective, how explosive, and how efficient was your offense last year? Wake Forest, 71st effectiveness. Explosiveness, absolutely almost non-existent. 98th out of 134 teams. And as far as efficiency, 82nd in college football. When we put it all together, this team was our 82nd rated offense in 2024. That is something that absolutely has to improve going into 2025. And when I look at the quarterback position, Hank Brockenmeyer, 12 games started last year, completed less than 63% of his passes in that offense. Your quarterback should be closer to the 70% mark. So really poor job there completing passes. 2,593 yards passing. That was good for about 216 yards per game passing. We're looking at a quarterback with a touchdown to INT ratio, 16 touchdowns, 10 INTs. Absolutely cannot win at this level at college football when your quarterback has less than a 2-to-1 touchdown to INT ratio. College football, you want your quarterback more along that 2.5 to 3 touchdowns passing to turnover ratio. So for him to be about 1.6 to 1 ratio there, just absolutely not good enough. We'll see if he is going to be the starter going into the 2025 season, or if they're going to look to move on from Brockenmeyer. All right, now let's take a look at the defense of side of the ball here. See if the defense was also a part of the problem, or did they provide some ray of hope here? Once again, we're going to use that baseline of 68. How many of their opponents were inside of that top 68 here? Well, we're going to start right there with Ole Miss. 5th best offense in college football last year. Louisiana was 38th. NC State was 43rd. Clemson was 13th. North Carolina was 40th. The Canes had the number one scoring offense last year. And then Duke was 59th. So 7 of their opponents' offenses were inside of that top 68. So a much better caliber offenses that they faced week in and week out. You're talking about an average power ranking of 48. That would typically be about a team that was 8-4, possibly even 9-3 with that kind of offense. And I would probably lean more towards the 9-3 mark there. So this defense for Wake Forest faced much better caliber opponents than what their offense went up against defenses last year. So going to be interested to see how the metrics shake out here for the defense as well. Now, points per game allowed. Accounting stats say 32.5. When we adjust for opponent, goes down to 28 points per game. As far as their passing yardage allowed, 278 yards per game passing. When we adjust that for opponent, 251 yards. So an improvement of almost 27 yards. As far as the rushing defense, 157.2. We adjust for opponent, ticks up just a little bit, 161.5. So only a 4-yard deficit there. As far as their total offense allowed, 435 yards per game. When we adjust for opponent, does tick down to 413, but still you're talking about almost a 50-yard per game differential than what the average team gave up last year. Now let's take a look at their opponent's drives ending with a score. 44% of their opponent's drive ended with either a touchdown or field goal. That's well outside of range there. As far as their opponent's drive ending with a touchdown, almost 32%. Again, well above the average there. And third down conversion, this team could not get off the field on third downs. Opponents were converting at a 44.6% on third downs. Defense could not get after the quarterback. Only 17 sacks when we adjust that out. And their opponents absolutely feasted on fourth downs. 10 conversions, 13 attempts, 77%. That is 24 percentage points higher than what the average was in college football last year. For 17 turnovers. So when I get to the 3 E's, you can kind of imagine with some of the data that I just gave you where this team is going to finish there. 105th effective defense last year. 81st in giving up explosive plays and 90th in efficiency. The Wake Forest defense was even worse than their offense last year in those 3 categories. This team finished the regular season as our 93rd power-ranked team in college football. So if I had to kind of sum up their offense in a bullet point statement, offense struggled with consistency all season long. Talked about the offensive line play. We know that that's also on the quarterback as well. And the defense, major issues in stopping opponents last year. The points per game, the yards per play, pass defense well outside of the norm. This defense had some major gaps in it in 2024. So let's take a look at the coaching and situational play after we get through with the special teams. Special teams, if I had to say, was well above average last year. 15 out of 19 on their field goal attempts, almost 79%. So good job there. Did a great job of converting their extra points. 4.5 punts per game for an average of 44.3 yards per punt. That put them around 27th in college football last year. So really good job out of their special teams. Now, -4 turnover differential. That's problematic there. But this team did not do damage to themselves with penalties. Only 5 penalties per game for about 47 yards there. So discipline and attention to detail wasn't the problem as far as committing penalties goes. Now let's take a look at the coaching situation here. Dave Clawson, 0-5 in one-score games, 1-4 against quality opponents. Got to do a much better job in 2025 in that aspect. Let's take a look at the splits here and see how this team did in their wins compared to how they did in those losses. In the 4 wins, this offense was cranking out 32 points per game, 248 yards per game passing on about, let's call it 34 passing attempts per game, 7.4 yards per attempt. That tells me right off the bat, you're not able to push the ball down the field with any real consistency. That number in college football has got to be 8.5. Now, the yards per completion, 12.4. That is much more in range of where a team needs to be at in college football. The running game, 38 rushing attempts per game, 161 yards per game on the ground, 4.2 yards per rushing attempt. Closer to being about where you want to be at in college football at 4.5 yards per rush. 3.5 total touchdowns per game, 1.3 turnovers per game in those 4 wins. Team executed really well on 4th downs, going 4 out of 5 in their wins on 4th down, only committed 5 total turnovers in those 4 games. In their 8 losses, 22.4 points per game. Same amount of passing attempts per game, about 34. Passing yardage, not that big of a difference, 236 yards per game passing. Once again, 7 yards per attempt, 11.2 yards per completion. The rushing attempts, pretty close to what they were in those wins at 36 rushing attempts per game, but the yardage goes down significantly. Only 115 yards per game rushing, 3.2 yards per rush. This team struggled converting on 4th downs, 19 4th down attempts in those losses, but only converting about 58% on 4th down. And here's the big one, committed 16 turnovers in those 8 losses. So the touchdowns per game goes down by 4 touchdowns, and the turnovers go up. Now, let's take a look at those numbers for their defense in those splits. In their 4 wins, this defense was allowing 21.8 points per game, 242 yards per game passing on about, let's call it 39 passing attempts by their opponents, 6.2 yards per attempt. So they did a fantastic job of not allowing their opponents to push the ball down the field. It did a great job of tackling, 9.2 yards per completion. So their cornerbacks and secondary safeties did a great job of tackling after that receiver caught the ball. As far as the run game by their opponents, 31 rushing attempts per game for 110 yards per game of rushing offense allowed, 3.5 yards per rushing attempt there. Their opponents were averaging about 2 touchdowns per game and virtually almost 2 turnovers per game. This defense forced 7 turnovers in the 4 games that they won last year. In their losses, defense was giving up 38 points per game. The opponents, about the same amount of passing attempts per game, 38, but the passing yards per game goes up to 296 yards per game, 7.9 yards per attempt, 10.8 yards per completion. The run game is where I see the biggest jump. Their opponents ran the ball 36 times per game, but the rushing yardage goes up to 181 yards per game. 5 yards per rushing attempt. Their opponents average 4.4 touchdowns per game, turnovers 1.3. This team in 8 losses only forced 10 total turnovers. And of course, their opponents did a much better job of converting on 4th downs, 8 out of 10 in those 8 losses. So defense, when they lost, they were giving up about 16 more points per game, about 54 more yards per game passing, about 72 more yards per game rushing. So basically about 4 more plays per game, but giving up 125 more yards with that additional 4 plays. So this team was absolutely getting carved up on the defensive side of the ball when they lost. So let's go ahead and get to the final grade for Wake Forest. The Wake Forest Deacons will get a C- from us here at the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network. What went wrong? Offensive line play. 40 sacks allowed led to poor execution. Defensive struggles. Too many yards, too many points per play. Lack of playmakers for Wake Forest in game situations there really showed its head. So what's the final verdict? Wake Forest struggled throughout the season due to inconsistencies in all phases of the game. They need to improve the offensive line play and much better decision-making for the quarterback. Defensive efficiency has to turn around next year if this team is going to take a step forward. So in the final couple of minutes that we have here, let's talk about the 3 keys that this team absolutely has to improve on in 2025. First and foremost, and can't echo this enough, improve the pass protection and O-line play. Gonna marry that up with better decision making from the quarterback as well as the offensive coordinator and head coach. Gotta be able to scheme up better pass protection there. If that means keeping a tight end and a running back in to help with protections, we're talking about 6 and 7 man protection schemes. That's something that Wake Forest absolutely has to consider going into 2025. Key number 2, find a more explosive playmaker either at the running back and or the wide receiver spot going into 2025. When I look at their leading rusher, Desmond Claiborne last year, 12 games, 212 rushing attempts, 1,049 yards, 4.6 yards per rushing attempt, 11 touchdowns. When I look at their leading receiver last year, Taylor Morin, 64 receptions, 756 yards, 11.8 yards per reception, only 2 receiving touchdowns. Their leading receiver only averaged 63 yards per game there. And their final key, strengthen the defensive front. Got to get more stout against the run game, and you can help that out by having a better offensive game plan as well. If Wake Forest can focus on these 3 key areas, this team can absolutely take a step forward and compete for bowl eligibility in 2025.
Thank you for tuning into this podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and our deep dive into all things college football. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button. You can follow us on Twitter at CrunchTimeVIP for updates, insights, and more content. And make sure to visit our website at crunchtimesportsadvantage.com for in-depth blogs, game previews, and information about our Crunch Time Express handicapping packages. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time for our next patient on the 2024 College Football Autopsy Report.